Okay, we're going to try and take a virtual tour of some of the most historic buildings on Front Street in Harrisburg. This is Governor's Row, and it's called Governor's Row because about half a dozen different governors of the early 19th century, prior to the Civil War, lived in these houses, not as a state-owned official governor's residence, but this is where they rented. The very first one was this brownstone here at 21 North Front Street, and that was the home of Governor Findlay, and he was the first governor to live in Harrisburg. And let's start over here, actually. 17 North Front is the southernmost building in the block. 19 North Front is gone, that's the gap there. Art Association occupies the Governor Findlay Mansion now at 21 North Front. 23 North Front is an office building. 25 is another office building. And 27 North Front has an interesting story that we're going to get to in just a moment. And then beyond that is the McCormick Riverfront Library, just beyond that tree. We'll talk more about that later. What I'm going to show you now is one of the 113 outdoor history exhibits, which kind of give you a "you are here" story of different historic properties and landmarks around Harrisburg. And Francis Ron Shunk, Governor Shunk, lived in that house there. And Governor John Andrew Schultz, in the center photograph, he lived in that house there, the lower house with the arched windows. And Governor William Findlay, as I mentioned, he lived in that house there. That was never a governor's house, but that was the John Briggs house. And it has been beautifully restored by the Vartan Group. It won the Historic Preservation Award of Historic Harrisburg Association in 2016, being restored back to residential use. I believe it has 7 apartments now. Now, before we go into detail, let's look at this block of newer buildings to the immediate south. And the thing that's fascinating about that's a building called Keystone Plaza. And you'll see some architectural consistency from Governor's Row to the brickwork and the bay windows on Keystone Plaza. And you'll also see kind of a roof line that ties it to the building to the south, which is the Dauphin County Courthouse. Keystone Plaza was designed by Chuck Alexander, architect, whose parents are well-known, Marion and Bill Alexander. And I think it was it filled a space that had been a parking lot for decades, and yet it really respects the architectural heritage of Front Street very nicely. So there we have the Briggs house, and Findlay, Schultz. I don't think any governor, or no, Schultz is that one, and I don't think any governor lived in this one here. In any event, they all kind of had this late colonial federal style of architecture, 2.5 stories high, but 1, 2, 3 of them actually were rebuilt in a later architectural style, which I would call Italianate or Victorian. Now, as we go over here to the Governor Schultz house, now these were originally designed by Stephen Hills. He was the architect of the first Capitol building in Harrisburg, circa 1815 to 1822. And he built the whole row of houses, knowing that governors and other people of prominence would want houses to match their prominent lifestyle. So he built this row of houses. He was the designer, and Robert Harris, grandson of Harrisburg's founder John Harris, was the investor in this beautiful early endeavor to enhance the housing stock of Harrisburg. And it's just remarkable that really 200 years later, in 2020, these buildings built circa 1820 are still in such great condition. Now, the Schultz house, which architect Stephen Hills apparently even lived in briefly, later gained fame as the Haldeman Haley House. And the Haldeman family was a prominent family. Richard Haldeman was an industrialist of the 19th century, and his daughter, Sarah Haldeman Haley, was the last person to live in that house as a private residence. And over here to the left, where you now see the library building, that was Sarah Haldeman Haley's garden for many years. And in the early 20th century, she, in her will, left her house and her garden to the library, and the library building was built circa 1914, so it's just over 100 years old, and in a beautiful colonial revival style of typical central Pennsylvania limestone, fieldstone construction. So what has happened very recently is the Governor Schultz mansion, the Haldeman Haley mansion, behind that tree. Maybe we can see it better from over here. That's been acquired by the library system, the Dauphin County Library System, for expansion. And it's a perfect move that they've made, acquiring the building next door. It had been an office building for many decades. We're told that the Marquis de Lafayette visited there when he made his famous visit to Pennsylvania in the 1820s. A lot of traffic at rush hour here, but I think you can kind of hear. Well, that's enough of that tour of Governor's Row in Harrisburg. Oh, we'll just mention the two McCormick mansions across Walnut Street. The James McCormick mansion, that was a family of the McCormicks who owned the Dauphin Deposit Bank, lived there. And next door, Vance McCormick, who was a cousin and married to Gertrude Olmsted, lived in the house with a green roof. I'm sorry we can't see more of it, but this is enough of today's tour. It's kind of cold out here for the end of April.